first item is to discuss with the Edgemont Community Council, Dylan Pyne and Lucas Cioffi, safety and sidewalks, and hear their committee reports. So thank you.
Great. Don't forget to turn the mics. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Town Board. We'll begin. I'll have Lucas provide a little bit of background on the process and how the report was created. We'll go through the findings of the report. I'll go through the findings of the report, and then we're happy to take questions and have a dialogue. So, Lucas?
Turn your mic on, Lucas.
Thank you. Thanks for having us this evening, and we appreciate the audience. We know it's really important to have traffic safety. It's been on everyone's mind in town. So when Paul invited me to be on the Greenburgh level traffic safety committee a few years ago, learned a lot, worked with people across the town, and then I thought, well, what if we do this for Edgemont, have our own traffic safety committee as part of the Edgemont Community Council. And one thing I learned from doing it town-wide, if you ever want to do that again, is really kind of keeping it short, because our committee lost steam over time. So we tried a different approach here, where we want to engage a lot of people in a way that they could afford to spend time. So the most number of people were submitting survey responses, and then they were also highlighting areas that they saw from their perspective where there were problems for biking or walking or sidewalks or crosswalks. And we collected all these ideas and put them on a map, and then people could visualize where the problems were. And then we started to meet neighborhood by neighborhood. Edgemont has how many? Eight neighborhoods. 8 neighborhoods. So each neighborhood association had their own meeting on Zoom in an hour. We went line by line, and we created a list of dozens of these hazards that we wanted to address, and then we prioritized them in additional surveys. So a total of 632 responses from residents, and we created this report, and Dylan can read the highlights. After we covered everything in Edgemont, we said, well, we're going to want to focus on some of the most important areas, so we focused on 3 of the biggest roads. So we focused on Ardsley Road, Fort Hill Road, and Old Army Road. And we didn't cover Central Avenue since it's dealing with the state, but we want to address things that are related to the county and the town.
And before I jump into this, do you want to touch briefly on the monthly meetings that we have with Sergeant Fontanalis?
Yep. Greenburgh Police Department has been great. DPW's been great. Garrett's been great, meeting with us month after month now. We have a regular standing meeting where we go over the items that are not covered on the big major roads. Again, Fort Hill, Old Army, and Ardsley Road. So there's a lot of other smaller areas, missing crosswalks and things like that, that could be handled with a lot less spending. Doesn't necessarily require big expenditures with the capital budget. So we're dealing with those as they come up and going through the list with Sergeant Fontanalis, who's been excellent.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Lucas. So the 3 most significant findings out of this report, requests from Edgemont residents, have been a timetable and schedule for the installation of sidewalks, pedestrian safety measures, and related features on Fort Hill Road, Old Army Road, and Ardsley Road, including an engineering traffic analysis to ensure a safe and viable roadway design. Priority should be the installation of an ADA-compliant sidewalk on Fort Hill Road, starting at Underhill Road and continuing to Longview Drive. The second priority, the implementation of traffic calming measures across Edgemont, with the priority for the installation of a speed table on Old Army Road and an immediate increase in police presence and speed enforcement. And third, the installation of a smart traffic light at the intersection of Ardsley Road and Fort Hill Road. The support is contingent upon the light being able to sense traffic beyond the line of sight, so that the light can reflect in real time to actual actual traffic conditions, not merely based on the expected traffic patterns by time of day, to proactively prevent congestion building up all the way to Central Avenue, and also significantly in the 3 other directions. The ECC urges the town to share a model for how the light will perform at various times of day prior to installation, and to make sure that the light is easily reprogrammable based on the information learned during the first week after installation. So these were our priorities. We certainly understand that based on various funding opportunities, some of these the timeline of these priorities might shift, but we'd love to hear from the town board on the reaction to the report, and any questions we're happy to answer.
Garrett, do you want to talk about the grant that you discussed with the town board?
Sure. Happy to. And first off, I'd just like to say that the report is excellent and super helpful. The fact that you did this without a consultant is, very applaudable, so excellent job. When I read the report, understanding that the Fort Hill Road sidewalk was the number one opportunity, or number one priority, gave that a lot of critical thought. I thought critically about Old Army Road, thought about the signal, the prospect of a signal at Fort Hill and Ardsley Road. And at least as far as Old Army Road, and I will speak to Fort Hill, it strikes me as a great candidate for the Transportation Alternative Program grant. It's the TAP grant. And as a reminder, the town has been successful 3 times now with the TAP grant, building sidewalks on state roads. The TAP grant is not exclusive for state roads. The federal government identifies by map local roads that are eligible for federal funding. And while both Fort Hill and Old Army are on that list, Old Army strikes me as the superior candidate for the TAP grant with my knowledge and the town's knowledge of the inputs that go into a successful TAP grant application. Old Army really checks the box in terms of access to schools, safe routes to schools, and that is like one of the most highest priorities about these grants. In meeting with these gentlemen, they've identified different crosswalks that are major challenges along Old Army Road, and the TAP grant is specifically designed to employ traffic calming measures, but do it in a way where you have a dedicated engineer that's independently hired and that essentially designs out each portion, each sidewalk, identifies whether things like speed tables are a good option, and it's just exactly the type of grant mechanism that I think the Old Army Road sidewalk would be a major candidate for. So in my opinion, if the town board were supportive, I feel that town staff working with engineering could put together a very strong TAP grant application for Old Army. Just quickly, knowing that Fort Hill is the number one sidewalk priority identified in this report, the only reason that I caution against a TAP grant for Fort Hill Road is I feel like there's too much variability in that future design. Fort Hill Road is as narrow as 26 feet in right-of-way length. So I'm not talking curb to curb or edge of pavement to edge of pavement. I'm actually talking one side of the road where the private property starts to the other side. So when you have 26 feet and now you have a narrow road in there, you really have minimal shoulder of right-of-way to put a sidewalk. Now that in itself is not fatal to a project because yes, you can acquire private property, but from when I see that narrow of a right-of-way, in all likelihood, you're acquiring property almost throughout the whole span. So that offers, complexity from both a cost perspective. But then in addition, there is the prospect with Fort Hill Road that not only is the right-of-way width so narrow, but the actual physical space could conceivably be too narrow to physically fit 2 road lanes, which are presently there, and then a 5-foot sidewalk. So I do have concerns that the only way to really affect a sidewalk for that span is potentially to do a one-way. And I know that that doesn't rank as high supportive via this report, and I understand that. One-way is a very dramatic change. But with those sort of volatile conditions, that's not what the TAP grant reviewers want to see. They don't want to see an application that says, well, the goal is a sidewalk, but we're not sure how we're going to get there. I feel like that would rank very low, and we would invest a tremendous amount of time. I think the public support would be there for it, but I feel that that would rank very low, and I just personally would be cautious about investing so much time into that.
And the wild card. And the wild card is the people whose property is affected and whether they would be willing to comply. And that becomes problematic even for the most worthy of projects. In my experience, I've come across that.
And just to be transparent, though, it truly is not fatal to a project because to be very transparent, West Hartsdale Avenue, sidewalk, I think it's estimated that there will be 10 property acquisitions. So it does happen, it's just, I'm very concerned that it would be the whole span of acquisitions.
Right.
Because
Not fatal, but it is problematic and less likely for the state to be willing to take,
They'll go with
That
it. They'll go with something that's more certain,
yeah.
right?
I would think so. So there's that prospect of the TAP grant, and if the town board supports that, we know what to do, we know how to execute a competitive grant, there's no guarantee we will get it.
You
It's
say that each time.
It's an 80-20 match. This project, it could be upwards of, $3.5 million. So the 80% could be, say, 2.9 from the federal government, 600,000 from local match. So it's a sizable project. It's not a small project, but if the town board's supportive, we will do the work, and it's wonderful to have community support, and that's a very important part about these TAP grants. Even like individual letters from residents mean a lot. It's not just the letters from, government officials, which of course are very important.
Yeah, and we can certainly coordinate on a letter writing campaign or another community engagement process.
That would be great.
In terms of just sort of sequencing, if the town were to apply for a TAP grant for Old Army Road, would there still be, I guess, the appetite or the option to also investigate what needs to be clarified with Fort Hill so that it could be considered for either a future capital budget or for another round of TAP grants in the future?
Yeah, so if we just go one by one. So
Sure.
let's
Yeah.
assume Old Army, potentially great candidate for a TAP grant, and that might be a viable route. Fort Hill Road, the mechanism to advance that, I believe, is to employ a surveyor to do a boundary and topo survey. We did previously execute an RFP for that, so we have those RFP responses. They just need to be refreshed with 2023 prices and thinking. So I think we've got a leg up, and we can really just have that RFP refreshed. And what we would be asking a consultant to do is do a boundary and topo survey. And with that obtained, that engineer working with a surveyor could then take it to the next step and say, as is desired in the report, can we achieve a sidewalk and keep that two-way traffic? That's the desire, and it's understandable. And so those are the steps you would take. And if that engineer says, yes, we can, then great. It would be us coming back as staff to the town board to say, we've passed the test, if you will, from a survey and engineering perspective, and we would seek authorization to have construction drawings prepared for a sidewalk in that span from Underhill to Longview. If that survey reveals that it's too narrow, and that, in their opinion, with private property acquisitions, it's really going to be too much of a climb, and they opine that the only way to truly affect a sidewalk in that span is a one-way, we would work with the town board and the community to find out if there's an appetite for that. I don't think the town would want to invest money in a one-way study if the community is very non-supportive. But that's something we can think about as we get there. So the logical steps are to refresh that RFP, which doesn't take a lot of time, get a surveyor on board, and that's something I feel like we could achieve as fast as the board's supportive of.
The other thing is that if we did the Old Army Road, which has a better chance of getting the grant, and people see how it's enhancing the look of the community and pedestrian safety, it will generate momentum, and people may say, wow, look, what a great idea, doing more sidewalks, is. So, if it takes us between writing the grant and getting the grant and construction, it's usually like a 2 to 3 year process before, say, Old Army Road would be, before Old Army Road actually would have the sidewalk, it's probably 2 years, right? 2 to 3 years.
Oh, absolute minimum.
Right.
It's a very deliberative and good process. The grant's due at the end of January. I imagine the state would let those communities know who are awarded by the end of the year. So now we're into, we're already into the start of 2025. We would immediately get a engineer on board, And they would do essentially a year to a year and a half design process.
And then you do the
And
bidding.
then you do construction bidding. So you are talking a good 3 to 4
But
years
we
before
could
you break
also,
ground.
we could also, this is the grant, one grant. We could also be pursuing, grants for the Fort Hill, because there's other funding sources for sidewalks or capital budget, funding for part of it. So maybe we could even get something started on Fort Hill while we're doing,
Well, the study, anyway.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, and
we're-
ultimately, something like Fort Hill, my hope would be that the design would meet the community's desires, which would be to keep that 2-lane, but if it doesn't happen and the community, is cognizant of that and said, we're open to a one-way, and now you're opening up the prospect of a one-way all the way from Underhill to Fort Hill, if and only if that's the only way to truly get a sidewalk. If that were the case, there's something called Complete Streets funding from the county that I couldn't imagine a project that would score higher than that. Because now you're bringing safe cycling and safe pedestrian through a major artery in the town. But, that's all if and only if you can't keep that two-way
But
traffic. and
what I
affect the
find
sidewalk.
so exciting about this is that, thanks to your efforts, Garrett, we've turned this whole corridor into a much safer area. So you have Hillside, the sidewalk from here to South Road is under construction now. You have the Juniper Hill Road, sidewalk near where Gina lives. That's happening. You have the West Hartsdale Avenue sidewalk from East Hartsdale Avenue all the way to Knollwood Road, Dobbs Ferry Road sidewalk, Dobbs Ferry Road to 119, and then now we're applying for another sidewalk from Acme Supermarkets to the health center, so people will be able to, and then county is going to give us a grant for, from the community college to basically to the gas station, so people are going to be able to walk or bike from East Hartsdale Avenue, the Hartsdale train station, all the way to the community college. If we do the same effort in Edgemont, you could have the Old Army Road sidewalk going to the high school. We could transition to Mount Joy, and then we could also be doing Fort Hill. So you could have a whole neighborhood that will become pedestrian friendly. And I think when you think about it, if we could save a couple lives, it's worth it. And, I think that's the biggest negative in these communities is it's not pedestrian friendly. So I'm really appreciative of, the work you've done. I think this is like a role model for the way all communities, neighborhoods should do, pedestrian safety initiatives. You involve the community, came up with a really good report, and you are helping us give us a roadmap to make this happen. So I want to thank you.
So Garrett, Ardsley and Fort Hill?
Yeah,
Road?
so that intersection, pleased that, everyone's receptive or that there's a good climate for the prospect of a signal there. I mean, we have a great template at Sprain Road and Ardsley Road, which, I personally did not traverse that often, but anytime I did in a non-Ardsley Road direction, it was very scary. And that intersection just functions so much safer and better now. And I know that it's not apples to apples in terms of this intersection where I feel like a lot more pedestrian activity here, but nonetheless, very pleased that that is something that we can work together on. And there was some engineering work done, and I think it validated both safety and traffic efficiency that this traffic signal would bring. I read the report in this respect, and it does raise good questions about the prospect of a green turning arrow. So that is something that I think there's a bit more engineering. There was some good preliminary engineering done to validate the concept. We just need to take it to the next level. So in that respect, I do think an RFP to bring a consultant on to really get that project to construction drawings with some engineering to remain, ensuring that there's yeah, I think we do have surveys in place, so I think the right-of-way is not going to be an issue, but yeah, I just think we can really The town board is supportive of that project, and I know Sergeant Fontanellis has been a major advocate of what that would do from a safety perspective alone. So if the town board's receptive to that project, we could get the engineering team in place, hired, and get that project designed. We did the Hawk. That was a good template in terms of cost, and, you know, it was roughly a $500,000 to $600,000 build. I don't see why this would be any different than that, which, you know, obviously it's a lot of money, but it's, when you think about the safety it would bring and also the traffic efficiency, it seems like that would be a very, you know, money well spent.
If I remember from the original study, it brought the intersection from an F to an A.
Yeah, an F to an A or a B, which is just, I've never seen, you know,
Right.
improvements like that. Like, usually you jump for joy if you go from a C to a B minus, and it's like, yeah, but we, you know, you all experience it when you're trying to go from Central towards that intersection at rush hour, and, you know, you're sitting through minutes and minutes and minutes. That's just not going to be the case if a signal's installed there.
Reminds me of my first law school exam. That's like,
May I raise a few other considerations, or
Please
Ellen,
do.
would you like to? With the smart light, Garrett, the biggest concern, and there's overwhelming support for it, but the biggest concern is that they want to make sure that there's good modeling for how traffic will not back up from that intersection of Ardsley Road and Fort Hill Road all the way downhill to Central Avenue. In seeing the public engagement session with the model that the consultant was showing, it showed that it wouldn't, but I think it was, we want to see that really in depth. We want to know that the traffic light can actually sense around the blind turn. Like, how does it happen? Will things be installed beyond the blind turn? Because if it only sees to the blind turn, there is a risk of that backup. The main community concern there is you're going to need a left-hand turn, or it's going to be one direction. Coming from Central Avenue, and 3 other lanes coming in will be red light, which may work just fine. We're not the experts on traffic flow, but we just want to see the model for exactly how it will not back up. So we just really want good details on that before any dollars are spent on construction.
Are you saying to do additional studies to drill down, or to go more in depth on the studies that were done?
Maybe something that wouldn't require any money. It's for the prospective vendors who will be supplying the traffic light, if they can explain how this light will know that there's traffic beyond the line of sight. Will sensors be placed under the road or on the side? Will there be auxiliary cameras beyond the line of sight to extend that line of sight? Those sorts of things, it probably should just be in their regular sales pitch to explain.
So I do believe that would be best done through the same engineer that's going to design it and the signal and create the construction drawings. You know, they will be well-versed in exactly what an adaptive traffic control signal can do, and they will opine on how it should be programmed, whether it's split phase, like you say, one direction goes and then the next direction goes, and then maybe, you know, you can split phase, or you can have 2 opposing with green.
As long as they get a chance to talk to our community, because that's the single biggest concern.
Right, so I do think that the RFP wouldn't be just straight construction drawing preparation. I think it would have a bit of extra soft cost to, you know, be very transparent about how that signal would be sequenced and how it would avoid the concerns that you have. So I think that's reasonable, and I think that's good information the town would want before it made that expenditure.
And few more considerations. Ellen, did you want to go next?
No, I
Okay.
was just agreeing. that it was a good
Okay,
idea.
on Fort Hill Road, so this makes logical sense to not pursue the TAP grant because of the variability that is currently in the project. And so is there a way that the town board can commit to reducing some of that variability with the survey that you had mentioned in the next budgeting cycle, so that that survey can just definitely get underway?
this being the capital budget?
No, a survey wouldn't be, I don't think a survey would rise to that level of cost. Probably talking on the order of, say, 50,000 with an ad alternate to do additional studies if warranted in terms of one way. So I don't think that would be capped. I think that would be, you know, something that would be operating through typical DPW allocation for transportation improvements.
So it'd be tremendously helpful if there was a way to let us know as a community when that survey might be able to happen in the next few months, so that when the next TAP grant opportunity comes around, we can apply for TAP grant for Fort Hill Road, or potentially even earlier, maybe next year in the capital budget. We'll just see, but really that survey seems like the next step. Garrett, I'd also ask for that survey, if you can ask specifically which properties would be impacted by land needing to be purchased from the town. You can then work in partnership with the Edgemont Community Council, because we can talk to those homeowners and we can talk to the community in general who really wants to see that sidewalk built, but of course they don't want to impact their neighbors. So it's how much does the community want to lean into that? We just would really love to see some information about which properties will be impacted, and then also if, yeah, that would be really
Would it
helpful.
make sense for you to work with the Edgemont Community Council and coming up with like a draft of the scope for, a survey, and then we could have a you could meet with the ECC,
Thank you.
and then basically say, this is what, we're looking at, and if people say, this way we could sort of get a little.
Sounds great,
advanced-
Paul. Great idea. Okay, and then with Old Army Road, so we're talking about potentially 2 to 3 years for implementation. We're on a good roll right now with Greenburgh Police Department, and they're considering potentially lowering the speed limit, putting in a school zone on Old Army, which would reduce the speed limit from 25 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. And they're also thinking about recommending to DPW to put some crosswalks in. So, it seems like we wouldn't hear back until, you said maybe the end of 2024 about whether we win the grant. But if this grant wasn't happening, we would probably have crosswalks on Old Army by the end of the year. So how does the TAP grant process impact what looks like imminent progress on crosswalks? There's 3 crosswalks approximately. We were even talking about potentially speed tables. Does the TAP grant delay all that imminent progress, or can we do these things at the same time?
Yeah, good question. So if there are
Garrett,
measures,
move the
oh, sorry. If there are measures that can be implemented in the immediate that the town can make with an understanding that it would not seek to be refunded, those can be undertaken. You just would not get refunded through the TAP grant. So, yeah, if there are short-term incremental sort of quick fixes, if you will, that are logical, I would say that there's no reason to hold that for 3 years until, you're shovel-ready on a TAP grant. But you would want to be mindful that, there's some threshold level where you're going to say, okay, well, maybe we should hold off on
Makes a
this
lot of sense.
They don't
$100,000.
reimburse.
Makes a lot of sense.
They don't reimburse. Once you spend it,
Yeah.
But I think-
it's no longer on the table.
I think we're probably talking about maybe $10,000 per crosswalk, and we're looking at 3 crosswalks. So it would be wonderful if you could monitor closely the progress that GPD is making on Old Army already, and potentially a few more crosswalks get in the budget for next year. That would be wonderful, because we can't wait 2 to 3 years for crosswalks there. The whole reason I got involved is because a truck carrying all these batteries, which is not permitted on Old Army, was driving through at 3:08, hit a telephone pole. That's when all the kids are walking out on the most narrow part of Old Army Road. Knocked this telephone pole, just popped it out. It was disconnected from the road, just dangling like one of the bow on a violin on top. And it was dozens of kids walk there on Old Army. And then the worst part, that telephone pole gets put right back in the center of the sidewalk. It just seemed like, we together, town and Edgemont, failed to use the opportunity to even just move that telephone pole, and it just went right back in the middle. So it just showed that we need to do more to advocate for this safety. The final thing I'd mention is that there's a very involved community on Mount Joy, and they really want to see a sidewalk there in Mount Joy. Gary, is there anything you can share with us, any thoughts about how Mount Joy ties into Old Army? I understand it can't be part of the TAP grant, but what options does that leave the town? Is it just capital budget in the future? And any thoughts from the town board on what can be done for Mount Joy? That is also a vital road to get both to the high school, and interestingly about Mount Joy, people from across Central Avenue can use Mount Joy to get to the high school too. So it affects all 3 schools.
Yeah, Sergeant Fontanellis and DPW, or they do, they're thinking about all of these intersections, and which obviously meeting with you on a monthly basis is very helpful in that regard. But I know Sergeant Fontanellis has explored an incremental improvement at Mount Joy, which could be soft delineators and pavement markings, now that it's a one-way. It's something that might be able to be implemented soon, if there's not, capital budget for a full-blown Mount Joy sidewalk at present. So there may be actually pedestrian-minded striping and delineators strategically placed that could be very beneficial and give more safety than is there presently to students.
So that would be like a painted shoulder.
Yes, with potentially strategically placed delineators.
Okay.
It does become complex when you have to plow, but it is definitely something that is being explored by the town through DPW and the police, and very specific to Mount Joy.
The most surprising survey results we found were that people who live on Mount Joy are happy to give up lawn because it's on the right of way. If a sidewalk is coming, they're even happy to give up all that street parking because it's so important to them. So we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up Mount Joy, because all those people can't be in the room tonight sitting in these chairs, but they are really looking forward to a sidewalk on Mount Joy. So let's keep that conversation going. If you need more engagement with the community, we can find out more answers.
Yeah, I think there was some hesitation about losing street parking, but I think there is a solution for Mount Joy. And I'll say if we're able to make progress on Fort Hill and we're able to make progress on Old Army, then it really presents a unique opportunity, as Lucas mentioned, where Mount Joy, historically it was Mount Joy Highway. It is really that connector from the Greenville Elementary School side of Edgemont to Sealy and the high school.
I'm wondering, Garrett, before we asked you if the Mount Joy could be included in the grant, and you said that's not a state, the federal government doesn't recognize Mount Joy as a road that would be considered. If we apply for the grant for Old Army, and we indicate that Mount Joy connects to both Sealy and the high school, and we have sort of something saying, we want to do Old Army Road, but we're asking permission if we have extra money to use the money to connect Old Army Road, Mount Joy. Are you able to put something in that would not jeopardize the grant application, but might give us, this way we could, if they're interested, and they give us a grant, maybe then we could have further discussions, and they might say, okay, or maybe we could reach out to our federal or state lawmakers and see if they would give us a little bit more flexibility, because like you said, if we could get Mount Joy and Old Army, and part of Old Army, that might give us more bang for our buck in terms of public safety.
And look, putting the grant aside, the general approach, with sidewalk connectivity is to see the whole picture, right? So we will certainly, in the grant application, be identifying that, this is an artery, and there are connections off of that which we aspire to, and locally we will be looking to invest in. And I think that helps them see a larger picture and how that gets school children from not just those that live on Old Army Road, but, connector roads like that. So you cannot spend the dollars on Mount Joy with this grant.
Well, and I'll ask that question a slightly different way. Would there be efficiencies if, while the Old Army Road project is ongoing, to find other funding sources, whether it's the capital budget, whether it's other grants, to do Mount Joy at the same time, potentially using the same contractor?
Potentially. Potentially.
Because if it takes 2 or 3 years to get from A to Z, we have a couple years to lobby state lawmakers and federal lawmakers to
Simplest example, Hillside Avenue is going to be under construction soon. It's under construction, but the actual sidewalk portion is going to be next year. But, just simple example, they have all their crews, they are mobilized. We're going to have them build a small sidewalk entrance to the driveway of Town Hall on the right, where it just turns off into grass. Small retaining wall, quick job, they will do it. There's efficiency there. We're going to take advantage of that. what you're indicating is on a larger scale, but you should always be mindful of that, and maybe there is an opportunity there. Oh, if I could just ask one question, would you be able to share any experiences that you personally had or those that you've discussed with other residents about the one-way changes that have been made by the town over the last 2 years? Because sometimes, there's a lot of, not angst, but, trepidation about that change, and it's a difficult decision for the town board, but, they made that decision, and, there's not a Yelp, so a lot of times we don't hear back, is it well-received? So would you be able
Sure,
to share?
yeah, I mean, Lucas probably lives in this space a little bit more, but I would say anecdotally, I've heard from a number of neighbors, including neighbors who were some of the most vocal being against the one-way road, that now that they've lived through it, they've realized that it's significantly safer, and for the 30 extra seconds that they might have in their morning commute or their evening commute, they recognize now that it was the right decision.
Anecdotally, I've heard the same thing. I
Yeah.
do think that it'll be a little bit different, I think it'll be significantly different for Fort Hill, though, because you don't have Henry Street and you don't have the other roads.
Right,
Got
but
it. Thank
if we could get that in a written form, that would certainly be helpful, and certainly something that if can be helpful in convincing other locations that, look, this was the pre.
We could do that for you.
Yeah, we can put together a sizzle reel of happy neighbors.
Thanks.
Yeah, happy neighbors.
Just a quick note, myself, Sergeant Fontanellis, DPW representatives, town engineer, we did meet with the Edgemont superintendent, just 15-minute meeting, just to say, a quick check-in, new superintendent. They presented a lot of different ideas about changing some of the entrances and exits to the schools. So we really, in 15 minutes, we didn't really have much time to go into details, but we did get a good, discussion going. And like we do with all our school districts, we're going to remain in contact with them and be apprised of, their planning so that we can sync up.
And Edgemont also has a new director of facilities.
Mr. Rendo is on as well.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Well, I just want to thank you all for your time and for allowing us to
thank
speak.
you.
Thank you for all the hard work.
While I have the mic, I also want to thank Lucas for all of his work, and Lucas's committee, and everyone who filled out a survey, sent an email, was a part of this process. This has really been as Paul mentioned, really has been a model for community engagement, and it wouldn't have happened without Lucas. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucas.
You're most welcome. Thanks for the audience tonight. If there's any neighborhoods that are listening and they want to hear more about how we did these surveys with the specific tools we use, we're happy to share that information. Please reach out to the Edgemont Community Council.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And your work has already been discussed quite a bit internally. We're not going to get a better grant writer, for these TAP grants than Garrett. Matter of fact, when it gets close to the deadline, that light doesn't go off overnight. He just grinds them out.
He's a pro.
So if he tells me this has a better chance than this, I'm going with the better chance, because we can't put too many grants in, because there's got to be, you don't know what you really want, and you lose all of them, so.
And I appreciate Garrett's partnership and the partnership of Jason and Rich and Sergeant Fontanellis, who's been having
Oh,
these
you
monthly
included
meetings.
Rich in that?
Yeah, you really shouldn't.
He's about to come up here, now we're going to deal with his ego.
The partnership has been really appreciated.
Which is what we aim for. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving.